Well, full self-driving version 11.4 is here and it is a big improvement. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So as you can see here, I got full self-driving beta 11.4 release notes. Thank you so much to Tesla Bull. I really appreciate it. This was great. I will leave a link to his account in the description so you can go follow him on Twitter. Without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look here. Improved the decision to assert or yield for pedestrians at more crosswalks by evaluating multiple possible futures in the joint space of ego's actions and the pedestrian's response. So this is really interesting. This basically is starting to get into car psychology or human psychology in the car or something. Again, the ego car is the car that you are driving in, that's the full self-driving car. But basically it's that weird little negotiation thing you do when you see somebody near a crosswalk, you're looking at them, you're like, are they going to go across the street? Are they not? Do I want to assert myself and assert, meaning go ahead and go forward and not slow down unnecessarily? Or do I want to wait for them? It's a very nuanced type of decision. So this ability to assert itself or yield under the proper circumstances, we'll have to wait and see. I don't have this yet myself, but we'll have to wait and see how it does. But I get to experience that a lot since I drive on a college campus and there's always students who look like they might be ready to come out and walk across the street. So this will be very, very interesting to see, but I love the fact that it's able to use a joint space of the ego's actions, which is like the projected things that the ego will do. The visualization of that, of course, is the blue noodle that's in front of you as you're using full self-driving, but it's also looking at the pedestrian's response. What would they do if I kept moving forward? What would they do if I slowed down? That kind of thing is really interesting, and it's a kind of semi-intelligent type of planning that has to go on here. So it doesn't really say how they're doing this, but I could even consider that they could be utilizing something along the lines of a transformer, like a large language model type of idea here in order to let the car plan things out more. Second up and related, improved ego's behavior near VRUs or vulnerable road users by measuring their probability of intersecting the ego's path based on their kinematic data and preemptively decelerating when the estimated risk is high. So these two first notes are obviously highly correlated to each other, but this basically VRUs can be not just pedestrians, but obviously motorcycles or bicycles or things like that. Anything where a collision with this person would be a very, very bad thing. It would be a bad day for everybody involved. So when you have vulnerable road users, you want to be really, really careful around them. So what it's doing is it's measuring the probability of intersecting the path. So like if they pull out or something, what's the probability that I might hit them? Ego path, again, being your car, based on their kinematic data. So again, is it a bicycle? Is it a pedestrian? Is it a motorcycle? All of those things have different kinematics because they're going at different speeds, and then preemptively decelerating when the estimated risk is high. So if it projects, like if you've got a pedestrian walking out, you're like, okay, the fastest they're going to go is a couple of miles an hour. So I'm not going to be in any danger of hitting them. But the exact same situation with somebody on a bicycle that could be going 15 plus miles an hour or, 25, 30 kilometers an hour, that would be the kind of situation where you're like, oh, I better preemptively brake. So it's not just taking account of the fact of whether there's a human there, but it's also looking at what their projected kinematics are. How fast are they going? How fast can they go given the mode of transportation? All of that kind of thing. So this is really, really good. I mean, obviously for the people around you because you don't want to hit anybody, but it's also good for you because what it means is between these two, it's not going to brake as often unnecessarily, but when it needs to, you're not going to have to override. You're going to be like, okay, the car is preemptively braking and it's taking the correct steps so that I don't have to intervene. Next up, improved turn performance in dense, unstructured city environments. Examples of improved cases include turning when the turn lane is blocked by parked cars and avoiding turning into bus lanes. So both of these situations are you're perhaps making a left-hand turn into another street, and either there's a bus lane there or you're in a bus lane and you're trying to turn around a bus lane or something like that, right? You could be trying to turn around one that would most likely be a right-hand turn instead. But in any case, you either have to make a decision to go over the bus lane to get into the right-hand turn, go around it, or potentially even go into it, because sometimes you're allowed to do that as well, or potentially a left or right-hand turn where you're turning into that lane and you can see that there are cars in the lane you're trying to turn into. So maybe there's like a double left-hand turn lane and the right-hand lane is blocked. So what it's got to do is it's got to figure out, and again, if you remember John Emmons' talk from back at AI Day 2, I'll put a link to that up here if you're interested, but he talked about using large language models specifically for this type of situation. So here you can see they're improving the grammar to think about blockages, basically things that you're not allowed to enter into, things like bus lanes or blocked lanes or something like that where there's cars in the way. And they don't specify how, but in those situations, it's improving that behavior. So what it might do in a double left-hand turn situation where there are blocking cars in the right hand of those lanes is it might make the left-hand turn and at the same time make a crossover into the other lane so that it doesn't have to get clogged up by the parked cars in the other lane. Next up, improved lane guidance module to feed in long-range routing hints to the network for which lanes Ego needs to be in to reach its destination. Also significantly improved per lane routing type auto labeler. These changes combined resolve 64% of all interventions caused by bad routing type. So let's start at the end of this. Resolved 64% of all interventions caused by bad routing type. That is most of the interventions that I do these days. That is, the car is in the wrong lane. It's not correctly predicting how it needs to move in order to get into the correct lane in order to make a turn or to be set up properly to be in the, whatever that situation is. For example, in the morning on the way to work, I will be in the left-hand lane and I need to get over 2 lanes to get into a turn lane to get onto the highway. And the car has traditionally been absolutely terrible at that. It waits until the last possible second and then tries to get over, fails to do it. And, if I don't take over and like make it happen myself, it will almost always end up having to go and reroute itself and do something stupid. So I usually take over at that point because I don't want to be late for work. So anyway, this is the kind of situation where if this gets resolved, this is going to resolve a huge number of my personal interventions, the things where I feel like I have to take over. And if you remember, I talk about this all the time. I talk about the short-term second-to-second planning, the long-term planning, which is Google Maps essentially, or Tesla's version of Google Maps. And then there's the midterm planning. This is the midterm planning. This is the thing that has always been Tesla full self-driving's Achilles heel. It has not been able to handle that midterm planning very well. And if this actually works, it is going to be a huge step change in the ability of the car to navigate around city environments. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Anyway, so how are they doing this? They're adding in hints to the network. And I believe what that means is they may be actually using data and they may be adding on to Google Maps and whatever else, the Tesla version of that. So they may be layering something on top of the mapping data, the navigation data that says like these lanes are here. These things tend to be crowded at these times of day, stuff like that. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but they're adding things onto that, at least as far as I understand. And those hints are things that are like, hey, you might want to consider getting over a little bit early here because these lanes tend to clog up over time at 8 o'clock in the morning or something along those lines. So that would be my guess as to what it's doing. Obviously something more mathematical than that, but in English, it would be like, yo, you need to move over right now. It would be as if you were a passenger in a car with the person driving having never been in your town before, and like the tricks of the road. And what you could do is go like, oh, you want to get over 2 lanes right now because it's going to get really difficult to do that as you get up to the next light and you need to be able to enter onto the highway up here. So do this now. So it's like that kind of a thing. It's got a little extra like guy back there just going like hint, hint, move over now. That is my guess as to what's going on with this since they're saying hints. And of course, the other piece of this is in order to do this, you need a lot of data and you have to label that data. And they say they significantly improved the per lane routing type auto labeler. And that is pretty cool. What that means is that it's automatically, they've just suck in the data that they need, probably looking at situations like mine where the car fails, they're pulling in that data and then they're auto labeling the data, including what lanes it needs to be into at what particular time it needs to be there in terms of the trajectory of the car. And then they're training on that so that the car gets better about being in the lane it needs to when it needs to. And it was when I read this particular point that I was like, oh, this is a huge point release. This is a really big deal. This will make such a giant difference to my quality of life if this works as advertised. Next up, we have improved geometric consistency between lane, line, road edge, and restricted space detections by retraining our networks on the same dataset with the latest version of our lane guidance module, and by using a common feature space to predict line, road edge, and restricted space. So interestingly enough, I just recently talked about large language models and how Tesla might make use of those. You can check that out in this video up here. But this is the kind of thing, again, I think this goes back to John Emmons' talk in AI Day 2, when they're using large language models. They basically are using the lane guidance module and they're retraining everything with, I would guess, with more of a grammatical kind of understanding. So they're trying to create this consistency. They're trying to see that the lanes, what you don't want to see it visually is that the noodle that you have as you move through intersections or turn or something, you don't want to see that noodle wiggling around and doing things like that. What you want to see is it understands this is a lane, this is a lane, this is a lane, this is where I want to go, and it needs a consistency over time in order not to make bizarre like moves as it's making a turn or even driving straight through an intersection. And it looks like the way they're doing this is they're actually combining the feature spaces of lines, road edges, and restricted spaces all into one space so that they're not having to negotiate with each other. So you can imagine there was like one road edge module that just calculated road edges. And so it's like, here's the road edges, this is what you got to deal with. But then you also have one for lanes as well. And if you don't integrate the two together, they could conflict with each other. So now what they're doing is they're combining all of this stuff into one sort of universal space about roads. And therefore you're able to make a more consistent prediction and hold on to that and not have conflicts where the different modules might be competing with each other over what something is and what you should do about it. So the upshot of this for you driving is that it should just drive in a more, human-like manner. It shouldn't make bizarre like jiggles and movements and things or kind of come to a stop or slow down in certain situations. It should be much smoother about the way that it drives. Next up, improved recall for partial cut-ins by 39% and precision for false positive cut-ins due to lane changes into adjacent lanes by 66%, resulting in a 33% reduction in overall lane changing prediction error. This was accomplished by further increasing our auto-labeled fleet dataset by 80,000 clips, improving the accuracy of the auto-labeling algorithm, and tuning the distribution of training supervision. Yeah, so this is a mouthful. So let's start with what they actually managed to do here. So the improved recall for partial cut-ins. So recall again is false negatives. It has to do with false negatives. You don't want false negatives for partial cut-ins. So that means that what it's doing is it's not seeing the partial cut-ins. So that would be a false negative, and what it might do is flag it as a true cut-in situation, so the car brakes unnecessarily. So again, right, so you've got somebody who does like this and then they go back out again. That would be a partial cut-in, and if you don't understand that as a partial cut-in and not a full cut-in, that would be a false negative, and so the car might brake. Or alternatively, and it's a little unclear with this, right, because it's a partial cut-in, I don't, anyway, it could be a false negative that it's also not recognizing the fact that the person has fully cut in, but I think it's more like if the person sort of cuts in and then leaves again, the false negative would be imagining that the car was continuing and was going to cut you off. And then even bigger, they've increased the precision for false positive cut-ins by 66%. So again, a false positive is where you're thinking that the car is pulling in front of you, but it doesn't. So it's a little unclear again, because one says partial cut-ins and the other one says cut-ins. So I think in this case, again, they're kind of related to each other, but it would be a situation where the car maybe moves into the edge of its lane, or it's moving out of the lane, or again, the car might be pulling across two lanes, or it might be moving out of your lane. But if your car thinks false positive, right? If it thinks that the car is cutting it off and it's not, the car will brake. And anybody who's driven full self-driving beta, I'm sure knows those situations where you can predict it. You can see the car is like moving across your lane or something like that, or it's moving out of your lane and you're like, oh, the car's going to unnecessarily brake here. And it does. So this should reduce that type of situation by a significant amount. And basically, if they're correct, we're looking at a 33% reduction. So a third of the situations where the car would falsely brake when it doesn't need to, that should get resolved. And of course, what they did was they used auto labeling. They got a bigger data set, 80,000 clips. They improved the accuracy of their auto labeling algorithm. And then they tuned the distribution of training supervision. So they did some tuning to the model and the architecture as well. So they did a whole bunch of cool things in order to reduce the number of times that your car will brake unnecessarily necessarily when cars in front of it are moving in and out of its lane. That's the long and short of that one. Next up, we've got one that doesn't impact me personally as much, but a bunch of people on Twitter said this is going to impact them a lot. Improved understanding for when to use bus lanes and when to avoid them by updating the lane type detection network and improving map vision fusion. So again, we've got these course maps, right? We've got these things which say there is a bus lane over here. You're fusing that with the vision, and then you're also creating an updated detection network. In other words, it's a detection network that now might have a grammar for bus lanes, and not just bus lanes, but like when can I not be in the bus lane versus when can I be in that lane. So for example, a lot of bus lanes are, they're driving along the right-hand side of the road, and then there might be a dashed area where you're allowed to get into that lane temporarily to make a right-hand turn or something along those lines. So there's situations where you're allowed to be in the bus lane and situations where you're not allowed to be in the bus lane. And the overall upshot of this is that it's going to do a better job of understanding when it can be in the bus lane and when it cannot be in the bus lane, which will cause you not to get into situations where you have to make a right-hand turn and there's this, bus lane and you don't get into the correct spot that you need to make the right-hand turn. So if you live in a city where there's a lot of bus lanes, this will actually be a big deal. And there are actually places, I don't tend to drive them that much, but there's places around Athens that do have bus lanes. So I will probably actually test this out as soon as I have a chance to. Next, we have improved speed control during lane changes through better consideration of upcoming navigation deadlines, required back-to-back lane changes, and presence of a vehicle behind ego. So again, we're looking at that midterm planning, which is going to be the huge benefit of this entire update. We're looking at a thing where what it's doing is it's saying, okay, I have to get over 2 lanes right now. It understands that I only have a small amount of time / distance to do that. I'm going to have to make 2 lane changes. There's 3 cars behind me that are coming up very rapidly. Maybe what I need to do is accelerate a little bit to make it over those lane changes so that I can get over there in time to, get to where I need to go. That's the kind of thing where, again, the quality of life is going to be drastically improved for us monitors, the people who are in the driver's seat with full self-driving. And even more so, it's going to reduce the number of situations where the car is unable to make a maneuver that it needs to, like it needs to make a right-hand turn, needs to get onto the highway, something like that. And it can't do it because it doesn't get over soon enough and aggressively enough, assertively enough, I should say. But anyway, it doesn't do that kind of thing, and then it has to reroute, and it's a pretty significant failure, or you take over and then you have to submit something to Tesla about that. So the taking account of how fast people behind you are going is going to be a huge change. That's something that I've noticed that the car is not good at in the past. You'll see these cars coming up behind you and you're like, oh, it's starting to make a maneuver and that person's going to get pissed off, or it's going to bail on the maneuver because the person's going to, encroach within the safety distance or something. So there's a lot of situations where the car understanding that the cars behind them are coming up quickly, that is going to really help things out. Next up, added new vision speed network to infer the typical driving speed on a given road. This is used to limit the maximum allowed speed in environments such as parking lots and residential roads. So I imagine this might be a situation where, my residential road is 25 miles per hour and there are teenagers, of course, who like to go 45 or 50 in that area. And what it might do is it might just be like, nope, even if you've got it dialed up and you're asking me to go 50 in this zone, it's not going to go that fast. I'm a little bit worried about this because the sort of back route that I go around a shopping mall in my area pretty much every day, I think the car thinks that it's a parking lot and it thinks it's only 15 miles an hour. So if it actually limits me to 15 miles an hour, it's kind of untenable. I can't drive that slowly for the distance that I have to drive. So that would require me to come out of full self-driving to take that shortcut, which would be unfortunate. But I think overall, the basic idea here is that if it recognizes this is a residential area, there's pedestrians out walking their dogs and stuff like that, don't let the car go some outrageous amount of speed. And also true for parking lots. Even if it's a relatively empty parking lot, you don't want the car just blasting through there. And I've had that happen at the gym. The car comes off of a 45 mile an hour road, turns into the parking lot, and it's still like going really fast. And I'm like, whoa, it's one of those things where it's like, you need to slow down now. We're in a parking lot, no longer in a 45 mile an hour zone, road out in front of it. So this should make me feel better about situations like that, where it automatically tamps itself down. I would actually put in a request to Tesla that they do the opposite of this, which is that if it's 55 and you're in Atlanta, The speed limit there, the effective speed limit there is somewhere between 70 and 75 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. And the car should also understand if it's going significantly too slowly for the conditions. And it should at least ask and say, can I please go faster? Or you should be able to check a box that said, please follow traffic flow. And that would be a really important update to the ability of full self-driving if you gave it a follow traffic flow sort of option or something, so that if you were going significantly too fast or too slowly, it would adjust its speed according to the general speed of all the cars on the road. That makes you a much safer car, I was going to say driver, but it's full self-driving driving. But anyway, it makes you a safer car because you're not causing people to brake wildly, or you're not going radically faster than other people. So a follow traffic flow type of optional thing in the full self-driving autopilot controls would be really, really helpful. This next one is super, super cool. Mitigated hydroplaning risk by making maximum allowable speed in autopilot proportional to the severity of the detected road conditions. In extreme cases, autopilot may use the wetness of the road, tire spray from other vehicles, which is really, really cool, rain intensity, tire wear estimation, or other risk factors that indicate the vehicle is near the handling limit of the surface to warn the driver and reduce speed. So of course, anybody who's driven full self-driving beta knows that it says FSD beta is degraded because of the weather when it starts to rain heavily or something. But I have noted that when I continue to use it, it is dangerous, especially as the tires get kind of worn. It has a danger of hydroplaning because it will drive, there's kind of that feel as you're driving and you're like, ooh, the road's getting a little wet. I need to slow down a little bit and, not go crazy. And the car has not had that sort of feel for the road. And so there have been incidents where I've been driving and the car started to hydroplane and slide a little bit on the road. And I have to immediately take it out of full self-driving and take over myself. And this is a situation where it sounds like what it's going to do is take account of the environment. And this is really cool because it means it needs to understand the world. It needs to visually see what's going on in the world, and it needs to figure that out, take it in and go like, you can see the tire spray coming off of other cars. That's, a very good indication that it's raining a lot and that there's a lot of water on the road. It also, of course, can use its own tire slip indications. It can also use estimated tire wear. It can use what it thinks of as the wetness of the road based on the visual conditions of it. So it can use all of those things to slow down if needed. And of course, to warn the driver, which might be like, hey, yo, you might be ready to take over at any minute here because conditions have gotten pretty darn bad. So this should again reduce the number of interventions that need to take place under bad weather conditions. Almost done here. Next up, improved long-range path blockage detection and control on city streets. Eagle will now be able to perform lane changes due to upcoming path blockages earlier. So this might be construction, it might be parked cars, who knows what that kind of thing is, but I definitely, and I'm sure you've noticed too if you've driven it, that the car will just come right up on parked cars or it'll come right up on orange cones, and then it'll be like, oh crap, I need to get over. So again, midterm planning. That's why I'm so excited about this update. It's thinking about things in the 20 to 30 second range rather than the 1 to 2 second range. This is going to be absolutely huge. So again, you have two lanes that you're going on and there's cars parked in the one lane and you see them coming and you're like, oh, somewhere 50, 100 plus meters, whatever, I need to get over now, not wait until I'm right up on that car and then try to squeeze into traffic. So again, this should reduce the number of interventions drastically that people have to do in order to avoid getting stuck in those kind of either construction block lanes or parked car block lanes. And this last one is, I think, a first for full self-driving release notes. I don't remember seeing this before, but this is really, really cool. Improved developer productivity with better code diagnostics and C++ 20 features by updating compiler to Clang 16. This also improved photon to control vehicle response latency by 2%. So what they've done is they've created better code diagnostics and they've also upgraded their compiler. If you don't know what a compiler it is it's basically, you type in English language control commands and things and you're like, do this, right? And then the compiler is the thing that takes that and turns it into machine code. And I don't know what compiler Tesla used before, but I know that they have a very proprietary version of the compiler, and it looks like they've updated or upgraded the compiler to Clang 16. Maybe they were using 15 before, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is not just, the generic Clang 16 compiler. My understanding is that they use a highly, highly optimized version of that compiler. So this may have taken a great deal of work to make this happen. happen. And the really cool part is that that means that their developers can be much more productive because they have a better compiler, they've got better features, et cetera, et cetera. But the really cool part is just by upgrading the compiler, they reduce latency. So remember, latency is photon to control. So that's getting in raw photons of stuff into your camera to turning the wheel or pressing the accelerator or something like that. 2% is a pretty significant thing when you think about overall. If it takes 100 milliseconds for it to make a decision, that's now down to 98 milliseconds to make that decision. That is a big improvement. So 2% might not sound like a lot, but it is a lot when you're talking about latency. All right, so that's what we got, and it's really, really amazing, right? I think the two big takeaways for me, number one, are midterm planning, midterm planning, midterm planning. It's like real estate. It's like location, location, location. I have felt for a very, very long time that the big thing that Tesla needed to work on was midterm planning, and most of the stuff that they talk about in this is midterm planning stuff. So that is going to be huge, and I think that is going to reduce the discomfort that we passengers or monitors have, and it's also going to reduce the number of disengagements by a drastic amount. The second takeaway from this is that the speed of progress here. So if you remember, we got stalled out at 10.69.x for a long, long time. As they reworked the architecture, they were doing a major under the hood re-architecture of everything and making it depend much more on neural networks from the beginning to the end of the entire process. And now that they've got that re-architecture working, we're seeing updates coming at a very regular basis. And this is a really, really big update. And so while for a long time we were not seeing anything on the surface of the pond, what was happening was that Tesla was moving up, and making a huge change to the architecture of what they're doing. And right now we're starting to see a very rapid rise in the ability of Tesla to pump out these new versions of the full self-driving software and to make our lives better. And this is exactly the kind of thing that gives me a huge amount of optimism that we are really looking at full self-driving becoming fully level 3 to level 4 in no time at all. All right, I hope you enjoyed this rather geeky episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon and to my YouTube channel members. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.